So we want to hear from Erik Feig of Memphis Brow, talking about the legal planning that goes into forming a business and having a product, those kind of things. So Erik.
Thanks, Chad. And what I'd like to do is pick up from where all of our discussions have been so far and take a step back, building on particularly, Linda, what you were talking about, and speak about taking a process-oriented view towards legal as part of your infrastructure, as you're building your business, as you're evolving your business, and as in particular, in one case, if you are going to look for funding for your business. We've been speaking about all the practical issues about identifying, focusing on the right problems, some of the regulatory issues, the processes related to intellectual property and protecting your intellectual capital. So I think what I would like to do is now try to pull some of this together from the perspective of having been an attorney both in private practice and within a company responsible for all of the legal operations of the company, it was a growing company, and then being able to turn that into some practical application. So, big picture, like all of these operational areas that we're talking about, in any operational area within your business, legal is one that requires regular attention, it requires planning, it requires some level of investment, and it requires some element of nimbleness to be able to adjust to circumstances, all of which are relevant to maintaining the wellness of your organization and providing the framework within which, the legal framework within which your operation will be able to do what you've set out to do. It's not a one and done in terms of, it's not the type of infrastructure that you look at once. You put it in place and then you say, all right, now it's in the drawer, we've checked the box, let's move on. Rather, it's something that, in an ideal case, gets integrated as part of the culture of legal compliance, a culture of legal awareness, and the DNA of the company, so that as the company grows, it becomes something that then can evolve alongside it and become ultimately a partner to the business, instead of what is too often the case, particularly with earlier stage or entrepreneurial companies, where legal is looked at as just one more expense, often a big one, and an impediment and a distraction to the business. If you're intending to reach the point where you're seeking funding from professional sources, let's say VC money, being able to demonstrate that you have your legal house in order, beneficial, shortens the process and enhances your ability to tell the story, a compelling story about why an investment in the business makes sense. So maybe from a process standpoint, I think we can step back here to the earliest question, which is really, why form a legal entity? It's a question that's asked more frequently than I would have expected, but it's an important one. And one of the most straightforward answers is because if you don't, then you're doing your business individually. There is no protective separation between you and your business, you as an individual or you as your family and your business. The business's liabilities become your own. Practically speaking, that means your house, your car, your assets could potentially be on the line if the company has an issue or stumbles. Also, looking towards the more positive side, forming an organization, forming a company provides the flexibility and the foundation on which to build an organization. Ultimately, then that leads to the question of what's the right corporate structure. There are many choices, there are several choices that you can go through, and each one comes with positives and negatives. So taking the most common LLCs, corporations, partnerships, they all have their own advantages and disadvantages, tax consequences, tax advantages, governance, decision-making, Flexibility, taking taxes, one example. A C Corp is called, is taxed separately from the owners. An LLC is what we call a pass-through entity, which means that the taxes are passed through from the company to the owners. LLCs, they have more flexibility. There are other elements to consider. Each one of those are going to be very dependent on your organizations and your particular circumstances, your goals, your stage of development, and again, what your planning will involve. Hand in hand with the planning about an organizational structure comes the idea, and then really the importance of being able to assemble your bench. What does your leadership and staff look like? Where are you going to draw from? What are the areas of expertise? How are they going to be engaged? Who will be advisors? Who will be employees? Who will be in the role of, let's say, directors? Who might be contractors? How will you interact with them? How will you be able to leverage what they bring to the table? On the flip side as well, is how are you going to be engaging them from a compensation perspective? What would that look like? Now, included in that are our legal advisors, financial advisors, and all of the others that, again, will be dependent on the particular lane you're going to be operating in. But what I would stress in terms of, if you were looking at this from the consideration standpoint, is making sure you do the due diligence at each step with each of them to make sure you have the right fit, that you are aligned in direction, aligned in approach, and that you're bringing in the right subject matter and partnering type of expertise. This is, again, it's more than a check the box type of relationship. Bringing in an attorney, just as an example. Linda was speaking to intellectual property. That's one area we can talk about in terms of specialization, expertise. There are many, many others that would be required for the operation and the conduct of a business. Making sure that you bring the right people in for the job is a deeper dive and a larger consideration than saying, I know somebody who knows somebody that had a good experience with this person, which is sometimes, and particularly in earlier stages, how the initial lawyers might be found, but then moving from that to the next level, which is finding one that really has a tailored set of experience and skill set to bring to the table to meet your needs. Stepping forward, if you're developing or acquiring technology or intellectual property, asking the questions about what's your strategy, what are your goals, what are your opportunities, and then drilling down from there, again, issue spotting, how are you going to identify, acquire, protect it? This could involve all of the different types of stakeholders that you're dealing with. So for example, employees, we might be talking about in terms of legal documentation, intellectual property and work product ownership assignments, meaning who will own what is produced in the course of their relationship with you, confidentiality agreements, NDAs, which protect trade secrets and sensitive information that has competitive value. If you're engaging outside developers, let's say, or outside consultants, having the right types of agreements with them that, again, protect issues such as who owns what that's going to arise from the relationship, protecting your IP that you bring to the table, that your organization has developed and invested in, protecting theirs as well, and making sure that you have the right lines and barriers so that the two don't mix without intention. Identifying work product, deliverables, who will own what, where the payments will be, what the conditions on payments will be, all of that. The better developed those relationships are up front and the documentation are up front. This is I'll say this is a balance between making sure that you're getting the right level of detail versus a level of detail where the paper should not become the goal, but clarity should be the goal in these cases. And making sure that you actually have that certainty through an agreement, that you are going to get what you are paying for and what your goal is to achieve. I mentioned NDAs. These are used at various stages, often earlier than when you have a more formal relationship with a company. It provides a framework, a legal framework for covering sensitive discussions, being able to exchange information that you would not want to make public, and providing the obligations and the legal protections so that there is assurance that nothing that is not intended to be public doesn't become public. Acquisition of intellectual capital, it could be technology, could be knowledge, could be patents, could be any kind of intellectual property. Looking at it both from the inbound and outbound side. And all of this, before I go further, again, stepping back, in the context of the operations of a business are important to have because it provides certainty. And also, again, if we're talking about being able to tell that compelling story, if you're going to reach the point of bringing in investors or advisors, being able to say that that house is in order and all the bookkeeping and the legal documentation is done and done right is so important. License agreements can be inbound and outbound. Inbound is the idea that if you are going to license instead of, for instance, build your own, whatever it might be, the widget, could be an intangible, could be tangible, but having a framework, again, that says, here's what we each are agreeing we're allowed to do. Here's what we are agreeing we are not allowed to do. Here's the framework for who will own what, and all of the bumpers that come along with that. Going outbound is the concept that if you are going to be bringing product or service to market, similar to what we've talked about already, what are the terms on which you're willing to do that? And what are those boundaries in terms of what are the limitations on what those who are using your intellectual property going to do? So if you are providing another company or providing a customer or a consultant with a right to use something that belongs to your company, what are the limitations and what is the level of control that you're going to exercise over your own intellectual property? Done right, all of these types of agreements that I've mentioned so far can become assets to the business. They can help to shorten or at least streamline the cycles for negotiations. Sales, being able to generate revenue. If the care is not taken to develop them with planning and thoughtfulness, they can become impediments and they can become areas where you spend more time negotiating the agreement than you might be wondering ultimately if it's worth it. And then the cost exceeds the benefit in some cases, or the cost becomes prohibitive over time when poorly fitting agreements or relationships from the legal side are created and negotiated in order to get them to fit better and to turn them into something workable. Investing the right agreements up front is prudent, as well as doing the planning as to how you will approach use of the agreements. Again, all of these types. That includes planning for negotiations, planning for sales strategies. It ties into all of your business operational types of issues. And also it enables you as an early stage company or even a more mature company to build consistency in your approach, to build processes that'll help you manage all of your relationships more efficiently and have answers for questions when they're going to be asked. Other areas to think about, again, issue spotting in terms of internal infrastructure. On the intellectual property side, you might want to think about as well, how do you incent employees to be creative, create inventions, create patentable materials? How do you incent them? How do you reward them? Linda spoke about the idea of your trademarks and what can go wrong if somebody is trying to piggyback on some of the branding and the goodwill that you bring to market. Part and parcel of that, as she was discussing, is making sure that as you go to market, you have a sense of the landscape of the brands that you want to create as well. Another area, corporate governance. These are both strategic and operational questions. How you as an organization make decisions. What are your practices? What are your policies for decision making? Who gets to weigh in? Who are the stakeholders? How do you engage them? Who are the internal, and when I say stakeholders, I mean that in the broadest sense, internal, external, partners, customers, may include all of them. And what types of decisions do they get to weigh in on? All of this is relevant at the end of the day to that ability that if we were going to speak now for a moment about if we're going to try to raise funding or try to raise partners or strategic type relationships, it answered the question, are you ready to engage? Are you at a point where you can tell a clear, concise, understandable story and be able to back it up with the packaging of your legal infrastructure? That crosses operational, that crosses legal, it crosses regulatory, it crosses all the areas which your organization might be. And from a process standpoint, it goes from the initiation and the consideration all the way through due diligence, all the way through negotiation of term sheets, agreements, and then what happens afterwards once the agreements are signed. Issues to consider there as well. What are your goals? Short-term, medium-term, long-term. If you're looking for investment, for instance, are you looking for short-term tactical type money that will allow you to build, expand, or are you looking for longer-term growth? Are you at a stage in the earliest stages, let's say for some companies where the biggest challenge is making sure you reach profitability, or are you at a point where you're achieving that and now you want to be able to build that? What are the benefits that might accrue from bringing in investors? What are the challenges? There's always going to be consideration of both. What types of control are you looking for, or involvement going forward? Are you looking for being able from investors to be able to leverage their know-how, their contacts, their relationships, advising, resources, other strategic types of considerations? Have you done, if you're considering down this path, the due diligence on what, and being able to define what your goals are? Do your goals and your potential investors' goals, are they in alignment? Do expectations align? Do your time frames for if things to happen align? What are the possibilities in terms of the later stage goals or possible exits? What do all of those look like? Again, rolling this up, this ties into, again, that idea of packaging and being able to tell your story, answer the questions. What's your business plan? What's your roadmap? What's your market? What are your costs? What is your growth? What is your level of maturity and discipline, which is, again, where that legal infrastructure can be a great benefit in terms of being able to demonstrate. All of this comes back to, I think, again, when we look at this at a higher level, it's a process. The better you are and the more thoughtful you are up front in terms of planning your course, making your decisions, the better position you are to get the results that you're looking for and hoping to achieve. Chad, with that, I'll turn back to you.
Awesome, thank you. There is a lot of aspects of the business that a legal planning, thinking about these things ahead of time, can really help.